Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Every Day is Earth Day webinar series hosted by Emerald Built Environments. Today, we will be talking about the cost of LEED certification. My name is Pim Peterson, and I'm the growth manager here at Emerald. We have a few housekeeping items to get started. First, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A feature during the presentation, and we will get to them at the end. Second, we are recording this session. And it will be available to all registered participants. Today, our host is Emerald Project Manager, Abby McDonald. Abby leads our team of sustainability consultants with a passion for how we can all make a difference in the design, construction, and maintenance of buildings. And you're in luck today as we have a special guest with Jen Diasio from Geist Companies with us. Jen is an architect with a depth of experience in all aspects of sustainable design and construction. And with that, let's get started. Take it away, Abby.
Thanks, Lisa. So Emerald has touched at this point over 1,400 sustainable environments covering over 21 million square feet. We do have a goal to enhance 2,030 sustainable environments by 2030. With all this experience, we are very familiar with the question, how much is LEED going to cost me? We know it's always top of mind for design teams, ownership teams, project teams. So with that, we decided to have this webinar today to help educate. What we'll talk about today, our agenda and our hopeful outcomes, are to establish how we help teams set a LEED strategy that really focuses on cost. We'll also review some key tricks to minimize your costs or to look at your costs in maybe a different way. We'll explore some stories, so some real project stories and some owner insights, and that's where a lot of Jen's input will come in. And then, of course, we'll respond to any questions you might have along the way. So Emerald's proven process. This is the process that we use for all the work that we do. It's the first two steps are really important in setting that strategy and really getting at that cost question. So the first step, listen and strategize. This is where we listen to owners' goals and owners' budgets. Moving on to evaluate and plan. This is where we really clarify what those goals are and then turn that into implementation and strategy. So looking specifically at the LEED process, so very similar to that kind of wheel we just looked at, but more specifically for LEED, the cost and the strategy input really comes at the beginning of the process. So at the beginning is really where you're setting that LEED strategy and where you're setting those goals. Not necessarily LEED goals, not necessarily sustainability goals even, but setting your total project goals and getting those memorialized into your OPR or owner's project requirements and your basis of design. So memorializing that, let everyone know what your goals are, what you need to hit, what your budget is, what you want this project to be. And then of course with LEED, there are a lot of modeling and calculations that can be done right at the forefront where you can see what credits you can get, what maybe you can't get, what you need to make a few different changes to get those credits. So again, all of this is happening at the very beginning of the process. That's really where you can start digging into what the costs might be, what the kind of synergies might be with what you already have planned and what your goals are for the building. So the traditional LEED scorecard, most of you on the call today are probably at least somewhat familiar with this scorecard. It is a great tool to summarize where the project is at a point in time. And it also, of course, separates everything into categories. So disciplines can know, oh, I really only need to look at the sustainable sites category or just the energy and atmosphere category. However, it's not the best tool to figure out how much your project is going to cost and what your LEED cost might be. So sometimes a different perspective helps. And this is where Emerald's, this is a proprietary tool. We call it our credit prioritization and cost matrix tool. So we kind of flip the scorecard on its head. And just to give you a little tour of what this looks like, this first section over here on the left are just the basic fees. So what are you paying to GBCI and LEED to get your project certified? What are you paying for your consultants to be your lead consultant on the project? And then we really start digging into the prerequisite and credit costs. So you'll see this top section here on the right looks at all the LEED prerequisites, gives a little narrative about what the costs might be for that prerequisite. And then we work with the teams to kind of along the right-hand side, there's nothing there on this example, but along the right-hand side, put some real numbers in there. So get the cost estimate for how much is it really going to cost to hit all these prerequisites that you need for LEED. And then from there is when we move on to how much is it going to cost for each of the different levels of LEED. So as an example here, we have a bunch of credits listed out. These will get the project to, for example, LEED certified. Then that we work with the teams to get values in here so they can really see, okay, if I want to get LEED certified, it might be X cost more, or if I want to get to LEED certified, there's really not that many additional costs that I have for the project. So I know, Jen, we've been working on a project lately that really benefited from this matrix. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, it's hard to kind of gut check those dollar amounts in the beginning, but clients are simply going to ask, what does this cost, right? They're not going to accept, let me do the model and then we'll see if we can add the insulation or the glass. Like, they need budgets up front. So this tool was really invaluable because then we were also to make smart decisions, right? So maybe they were interested in concrete, right, to get the light reflectance, but that came at a price tag of $400,000, right? Versus adding the EV chargers was a quarter of that cost. And so then they were able to maybe tweak their goals a little bit to get the end result that they needed, but they had educated decisions, not just, okay, well, let's do that. And all of a sudden we've blown a budget. We also use this super early on in the process. You know, if you're dealing with a GMP or contractual things, you know, this has to be hitting that radar because, you know, it's not a $5 change order. It's, you know, can be a substantial cost depending on scope of your project. And so at least if you've budgeted something early on and are able to, you know, use this on how we got to LEED with these budgets, as you develop the strategy later on, you can push and pull those dollars, right? So, you know, the client comes back and says, oh no, water use is really important to us, but we didn't allocate enough there. Well, maybe we can, you know, get a better hard cost from construction on the upgraded thermostats with the CO2 monitors and trade those dollars off. So at the end result, you end up in budget, but you're using this scorecard to help balance those numbers and justify that to the client.
Yeah, awesome. And kind of from the flip side, we also had a recent project we worked on where the contractor gave an estimate of LEED that said it's going to cost $1 million to add LEED to your project. And we said, wait a second, let's take a look at your math a little bit there. And they actually had every single possible LEED cost in that estimate. So for example, they included a $700,000 PV solar array in that cost. Now, if you were to, you know, look at the strategy, look at the cost matrix, you'd be able to see that project didn't actually need a solar array or any sort of renewable energy to hit their LEED goal. So that was, you know, it's really helpful to spell out the strategy and really go line by line to see how much these things are going to cost. Okay, so now moving on to tips on how you can manage costs and save costs on a LEED project. Timing is everything, and we always say with every LEED project, it's beneficial to start early. When LEED's on the table from the beginning, that's when you can really incorporate LEED into your design and avoid any change orders, which I'm sure a lot of people on the call, you know, the dreaded change order conversation. A simple example of this are walk-off mats. So for the LEED Enhanced Indoor Air Quality Strategies credit, it requires that you have 10-foot long walk-off mats at all your entrances. Now, if you weren't looking at LEED from the beginning, your vestibule or your entryways might not allow for 10-foot long because that's kind of a long area. So that would require a big change order, a big redesign. Whereas if you plan for it early, a walk-off mat or a handful of carpet tiles is a very nominal cost in the full picture of the project. Jen, I think this is similar to that example you just talked about. If you have any other timing and starting early anecdotes to give.
I'm not sure you're going to like it, Abby, but I will share when we have a client that raises their hand and says, we're interested in LEED, what does that look like? My first call is to Emerald. and we set up a quick, I don't even know if charrette, but we run through the checklist just, and 60 minutes to say, okay, where are we? Like, what have we already included? What can we build on? And what are we starting from scratch with, right? And that's going to help you develop that budget and have educated conversations with the client. We don't need to do this because we've already talked about, not having irrigation on this project. However, if you want to achieve, 50% energy efficiency, there's some major things we're going to need to add into this mix. And just that, quick run through of the list with the project you already know and what you already know about the client is critical, because then you at least have a base to move forward with, and keeping all of the LEED things in the back of your mind.
Yeah. So with that starting early, the location of your project can really help set your strategy. So you can really start looking at LEED when you're looking at your different site selections. So you can compare and contrast. This location will get us 10 location points. This one will only get us 5, but there's tons of green space. So you can really start looking at that LEED strategy super, super early in the process before you even have a site in mind. So that doesn't mean, okay, you absolutely need to pick the site that's next to the biggest metro station or subway station in town, or you absolutely have to pick the site that has an opportunity to add tons of landscaping next to a bike path, etc. But it really gives you a number for what are the credits that I don't really need to pay for. I just get based on the building I'm in, based on my location. We just had a project we worked on located in downtown Miami, and they actually got 10 points just based on their location and the building that they were located in. And that's a lot of LEED points when you're just trying to hit LEED certified. That's a quarter of the points that you need. So this resulted in the project actually not having to do certain much more expensive credits. So the project team kind of just assumed, okay, we need to put in daylight controls and all these more expensive kind of energy efficiency requirements, because that's what they had to do on past LEED projects, but they didn't consider we're actually getting all these points just based on our location. So it's really important to look at that first, see what points you're already getting without spending any money.
And that's funny, Abby, I pulled up the project we're presently working on. I pulled up that scorecard before this, and in the site category, we have no. And I looked at it, I'm like, man, that's brutal, right? Because then we've got a little bit of an uphill battle. Those site credits are, free points, right? If your site fits, those are, easy to get. There's so many things that go into site selection. This may not always be LEED driven, but absolutely, if you have a choice between A and B and one gets you more sustainable, more along the LEED guidelines, that is super helpful to hitting those points.
Exactly. And thanks for bringing that up, Jen. We're well aware that, LEED's just a small portion of what you're looking at in the project. So it's just good information to have at the very beginning of the project. You don't need to make any decisions solely based on LEED, but having that LEED information is definitely impactful. So there's kind of another way to look at costs. So not looking just at that first cost or your design cost or even your construction cost, but looking at the trade-offs between first costs, operating costs, and even your greenhouse gas emissions or the life cycle impact of your building. So for example, a super efficient HVAC system or even a PV panel array, which we have a nice pretty picture of on this slide, those are very high first costs. And those are usually what are on the chopping block or what's really focused in on during any value engineering exercise. But the team really needs to look at the big picture. So obviously we have these big first costs, but do the operations costs lower enough to make it make sense? Does the payoff make sense? Does the benefit to our greenhouse gas emissions make sense? Does it help us actually reach our goal, even though it's a little bit more expensive? So really looking at the big picture rather than just that first cost is super important. It's also important to know that not all costs need to be in the design and construction budget. They can be in your operations budget. They can be in the owner's budget. Things like VOC sensors can be added by the owner after substantial completion of construction. Green cleaning can be paid for by the owner during operation. So it's important to note that not everything has to squeeze into that design and construction budget.
And life cycle cost analysis is often a question a client's going to ask when you're asking them, okay, to get these credits, we're going to need to spend, $200,000, $500,000, right? They're going to say, what's my payback? Immediately, what's my payback? I don't know everybody that's on the call today. I went to school for architecture. I have no clue how to calculate a payback on a solar array, which is where Abby and team come in and do a great job. In a couple of them, or in a recent project, we did do the whole analysis for the solar array and found out because that client was such a heavy electrical user and got such a good rate for their electricity, the solar array didn't have the payback anybody anticipated, and we ended up taking it out. So even though the client was willing to do it, once we looked at those numbers, it no longer made sense. However, on the converse, because another client had a corporate goal of emissions by some date, and we could have never gotten the design to do what it needed to do without those profile studies and operational costs to not only achieve that goal, but then how do we justify this to the construction side of that corporate entity saying, why am I paying so much more for systems or only using electric rooftop units when I know that gas is cheaper and things like that.
So there's also, of course, cross-credit synergies within LEED that can save you a lot of money, can save you time. A simple example, and we have a little picture of it in here, is using something like a refab shipping container as your bike rack shelter. So using this low-cost material will actually help with 3 credits. So it'll help you with your bike facilities credit. Those long-term bike racks need shelter. It'll help with your materials sourcing credit. Having a reused product gives you a ton of contribution towards hitting that 15% material sourcing threshold. Then usually, depending on what your roof is like or how much shading your shelter is giving off, it can also help with that heat island effect credit. So super low cost product, much more low cost than, say, buying a bike rack shelter just made for a bike rack shelter, can help you with 3 points. So really looking at those synergies from the very beginning can really help you save costs along the way.
And sometimes you'll find them with, the client's goals without them even knowing it, right? Post-pandemic, lots of folks asking for their outdoor spaces and their patios, and people want to get out. And all of a sudden you find that if you are smart about your irrigation or lack thereof, and you're planning your outdoor spaces, and hey, let's throw in some restore habitat, that doesn't seem that out of reach anymore because you're trying to create outdoor environments. That's a good place to find those synergies where the client may even be going that way from an employee wellness standpoint to start with. The other one we find a lot of cross-credit synergies is maybe not building per se, but when you do have high electricity users and you're starting to talk to them about sub-metering and a plan in place for the pieces that have over 10% of the load and how to work with the utility company to reduce their rates. Now you're finding not just, you're affecting process, which is sustainable beyond the building, right? And they're getting a payback from the electric company. So maybe it's not even just LEED credits, but if you're really examining what that client does, you might be able to find some more of those that are just better across the board.
Exactly. Yeah, looking at policies and procedures can really help, especially with some of those innovation credits. And some of the indoor environmental quality credits can just scanning those can get you points that the client's already doing. So in addition to credit synergies within LEED, there's of course correlations and synergies across different rating systems that we see projects pursue. So a lot of these credits are either identical or very, very similar. So it's really important to know, maybe we're interested in the well building standard. We're not sure if we want to get it yet. we're doing LEED, but we want to see how we would do with WELL. Well, there's tons of WELL credits that are exactly aligned with LEED credits. So looking at those synergies early can help save time and money in the long run if you're making sure everything is kind of congruent and your policies and procedures meet both rating systems. Looking up those, again, to be a broken record from the very beginning is super helpful to reduce costs, reduce time, and just make these certifications a little bit easier for teams.
And I think it's also important to understand what each of these systems offers to the client, right? Well, we say WELL is very occupant focused and LEED is very building focused. So, where we have a corporate client that has to have, the LEED stamp on their building, okay, we go that route. But when you find the companies that have the sustainable team and they want to talk about the policies and try to get fresh fruit in the lunchroom and things that some of maybe your corporate clients will be like, what, fresh fruit in the lunchroom? You can cater that to what your client's actually looking for, and especially those teams that want to get engaged. LEED's kind of hard to engage a sustainability team because there's so much technical going into the building and the cost and the GC and the 15 players to make that rooftop decision. That some of these others offer ways to engage more on that team basis and occupant wellness.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And that same project that we've been talking about that Jen and I are currently working on, they're pursuing LEED. They're also pursuing WELL. And when we kind of pushed that LEED scorecard over to the WELL scorecard and included what the company's already doing, all the great things they're doing for their employees, they're pushing WELL Platinum already. That's kind of just what they're already doing for LEED and all their internal policies. So, I mean, there's just tons of synergies and benefits to doing both and having those policies internally. That's all I have for you today, and I'll toss it back to Lisa to open it up to any questions you guys might have.
Thanks so much, Abby and Jen. This has been a fantastic conversation, really interesting. The project that you're talking about that you've been referring to is what type of project? Is it a commercial project? And how big is it? I think that might be interesting to the audience.
It is about, I'll say 100,000 square feet, 2-story, maybe 12,000 square feet, office area, mostly research lab development. So not necessarily manufacturing, a lot of R&D components that have a manufacturing nature to them, but it's not like, we're pumping out pieces of things, more lab type.
Great. And I think it's important to note that both of us have worked on a handful of projects now that are both LEED and WELL certified, including our own offices here at Emerald Built Environments, as a test case just to see how much synergy is there really. And that all happened sort of because of COVID and being out of the office and then planning for the reentry. And that's been a huge piece too, is helping folks with those reentry and how to deal with the reentry after some sort of an emergency like the pandemic has caused for us. So far, we don't have a ton of questions, but we have a couple prepared questions. So I'm going to go ahead and ask one of those. How do you know what specific costs to put in the cost matrix? And is Emerald able to estimate all the LEED relevant costs?
So we are able to provide costs for the services we can provide. So commissioning, air testing, building life cycle analysis, quality views calcs. But otherwise, we really rely on the contracting team to get real numbers in there because, I mean, we can give estimates, but every project's different, especially in these changing market times. So we only really are comfortable providing the numbers for the services we provide.
But the nice part about the Emerald Matrix is that you've narrowed the GC down to, okay, I need numbers on these 6 things, as opposed to handing them the whole list and saying, what does LEED cost me? It really helps you, how much are 4 EV chargers versus how much is LEED, right? It can really get focused.
And how much are 4 EV chargers? Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes back to the point that was made earlier by both of you on the return on investment and how do you streamline that as much as possible. Let's see, next question. Do the different rating systems you mentioned at the end have a discounts that you've already earned paid for in another certification based on the synergies you've mentioned? Is there a cost benefit as well?
Yeah, so the only ones that have an actual like registration cost benefit, so like when you're paying the well people or paying the LEED people, is the well health safety and well building. So if you're doing both, there's a cost benefit there. But of course, on our end, as the consultant, there's a cost benefit because, like I said, there are so many credit synergies where we don't have to put together 2 green cleaning plans. It's just one that incorporates both requirements. So there is a time and a cost benefit there.
Excellent. Jen, this one's more for you. Does specifying and using low emitting products that LEED requires usually add additional costs?
We don't find that too terribly difficult. No, we, in fact, in our ventures into multifamily recently, which not LEED, another platform, we're finding it pretty flexible, especially because multifamily is so tied to budget. We can, if you know the basic parameters going in, you're pretty safe. The market for finishes is ahead of LEED in most cases. You won't find too many problems or too many costs because of LEED. What you select, however,
yeah,
factor into that.
I would say cost differences are 0 or nominal for things like paint, for things like those you have to have water sense fixtures for some of the products. The place we run into snags are with adhesives, and it's not cost based. It's just the contractor saying that only this adhesive will work. That I can't use any other adhesive or maybe coating that's going to do what I need it to do. That's where we run into trouble. It's never really a cost conversation.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up the questions we have. Do either of you have any closing remarks you'd like to share?
Emerald's a great sustainable partner. If you feel over your head or not sure where to start, give them a call. Even just for that quick charrette that I've mentioned, they're a great team to help you look like a rock star in front of any client.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I was going to say, give us a call and give us a call early. We do what's called a LEED assessment or a well assessment, where you don't have to get into the full LEED consulting gamut where you're saying we're going to do LEED. It's just an assessment. We're looking at everything we know from the very beginning, putting together that cost matrix and showing you, okay, you need these 15 credits to get certified or these 30 to get silver, and let's fill in the cost here. So we can do an assessment on any type of project that you might want to get LEED for, or any of these other sustainable certifications.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, we're running out of time here. So as Abby just mentioned, please feel free to reach out directly to either of our speakers. Contact information is listed on the screen, and we are happy to answer them. Thanks for joining the webinar today. And this actually wraps up our series. So stay tuned for more webinars and educational opportunities coming in 2023. Hope to see you around town.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye-bye.